How are you doing? We're just going to give everyone about 2 minutes to join.
Okay. I could see the number going up. How exciting.
It's going up. I want to hit 100. I think we can do it in the next 10 seconds.
It's going to happen. Hi, hello.
Hello, everybody. Maybe just pop in the chat and share where you're calling in from today.
Yeah, you can share why you're here, where you're from.
Pennsylvania.
Hey.
Denver, Chicago, Florida. Grant says he's from Peace. I don't know if that's a city or an emotion.
Calgary, more Canadians. Yay.
Woo! Argentina.
Wow, that's cool.
Missouri. I'm from Missouri. London. Wow, guys.
LA.
Everywhere. Amazing.
Yeah, Alli, and counting.
Here we go. Wonderful. All right, I think we're about 30 seconds from having a critical mass here. And Dara says she's a psychedelic guide and cognitive scientist concentrating on healthy brains and healthy aging. Amazing. Yeah, I would love to hear what everyone does for work so we get a pulse on who else is in the room. Okay, amazing. Okay, guys, I think we're going to kick it off. Steph, I'm going to pass it to you to kind of give us a little intro, and then we'll go from there.
Great. Okay, let's get started. Hi, everyone. I'm Steph Karzon Abrams. I'm the research director for the Microdosing Collective. I'm a neuropharmacologist by education. I run a consultancy called Beyond Consulting that serves the psychedelic space, plant medicine, and integrative medicine from research to strategy. And I'm very passionate about women's health. We're going to dive in today about microdosing and menopause, as you know. And as psychedelics enter the mainstream, health transitions in the female human experience are often overlooked, understudied, not conversed about. And so, this is a step in the direction of changing all of that as we discuss menopause. So today we're going to learn about how hormonal changes move through menopause and how that impacts your brain. We're going to dive into the connection between psychedelics, particularly serotonergic psychedelics, and estrogen, why microdose is gaining attention as a non-hormonal option for midlife support. I think it speaks to the rising numbers in people who want to have agency on their health and wellness and approach health and wellness from a more integrative lens, a more holistic and more informed lens as well. We'll talk about science behind microdose and how it might protect the brain and support mood, and then share real life stories as well. So we have Dr. Grace Blest-Hopley here. She is signing in from the UK, and she's the founder and CEO of Hystelica. We have Marcella, CEO and author of Wake Her Up. Of course, our co-founder, Alli Schaper, and Chelsea, our community managers here as well. She'll be, looking over the chat and making sure that, if you have questions, we get to those questions in the end. But without further ado, I'm going to let everyone introduce themselves. Alli, do you want to go first, and then we can pass the baton to Grace and Marcella?
Yes, amazing. I'm super excited about this one. I've gotten so many messages from different women that have seen us promote this webinar on Instagram, and I think that it just speaks to how important of a topic it is and how underspoken about this is. I'm obviously super close with Stephanie, so I hear her talk about and really starting to pioneer and share this in a more mainstream way. But I just think that this information is things that should be baked into understanding what it means to be a woman. I didn't learn about the phases of my cycle until like 6 years ago. it's absurd, the back end information that I think should way more upfront. So I'm really excited about this group that we have gathered to, Marcella's going to share her story with mushrooms. Grace and Stephanie are going to give us more of, the detailed science and actually what's going on in your brain and your body throughout the different hormonal cycles. So I'm really excited. Like Stephanie said, I'm one of the co-founders of Microdosing Collective. My day job is I run a SuperMush. I run a functional mushroom brand called SuperMush, and we make superfood functional gummies, and very, very supportive and advocates of the psychedelic space as well. So I'm really excited to be here. I'm going to come back on at the end to give you a little overview of what we're doing as a nonprofit, what's happening on the legal landscape as far as microdosing goes, and then some fun updates on the community side. So without further ado, maybe, Marcella, do you want to introduce yourself, and then we'll go to Grace?
Sure. Hi, I'm Marcella Hill. I am the founder of Wake Her Up, also the author of Wake Her Up. And I always like to say, I woke up my soul before I woke up my body. So I woke up with my soul with mushrooms, and then woke up my body with hormones. And now my worlds are colliding in this. I'm in the front of pushing the perimenopause movement. So about 3 years ago, I told my story of finding out what perimenopause was. I had no idea what it was going through all the symptoms, and then found hormone therapy. It turned all the lights back on. I shared that story, and the next day, that video went to 9 million views, and it threw me into this world that I did not know existed. I didn't know that women after 40 had no help at all, and doctors didn't know anything about us, and that women just feel generally dead inside. And I just have made it my mission. I kept making videos. My videos have now been shared with Oprah and Good Morning America, and now I work with all the top doctors and researchers in the perimenopause and menopause space. And the fact that there is research being done on mushrooms in menopause is completely fascinating to me, because I have a global view of what is happening in women's lives. And yes, our bodies hurt, but also we don't know who we are anymore. And I always say, if there's two things I could talk about, it would be mushrooms and hormones. And so here we are. I'm thrilled to be here. I now own the largest directory in the world of hormone therapy providers. And so when women are like, where do I go? You go to wakeherup.co. It's women collecting all the places to go. And now we know where to go. So I'm so excited to be here. Thank you for having me.
Awesome. Well, I guess then it's me. I mean, it's wonderful to hear that story. And I think, I see some kind of similarities in, like you say, we often we kind of realize one day that as women, we are being chronically ignored by the system. And it's, not just in a social sense, but very much in our healthcare. And it's almost hard to believe, we are only really taken care of when it comes to our reproduction and not really beyond that. And I love to see the fact that you've collected such an incredible database for people to access. As Stephanie said, I'm a neuroscientist. I very much came from this, from the brain and how that works and how different things we put into our bodies or that are already in our bodies affect our brains. But I was really, really shocked when I started to research in psychedelics, particularly to understand just what a lack of data there was and what a lack of understanding and oversight there was from the entire scientific community of not just the interaction between women and psychedelics, but just the basic understanding of women's biology and just such a taboo subject that it still was for us to talk about things like the menstrual cycle. It's still a situation where women going through menopause often do not realize that they are going through it, because we do not talk about what those early symptomology are. We do not make it easy for women to put their hands up and say, hang on, something doesn't feel quite right here. And so one of the things that I really wanted to do when I founded Hystelica was to really bring forward that research to try and bridge that data gap to understand where psychedelics and female biology may have intersections that we need to be aware of, but also to really educate and to first educate the clinical teams and the research teams as to why it is important that they take account for female biology in the research that we do, so we don't end up with another big gap in the data when we see these treatments coming forward as they are doing now, but also really to educate women and to educate women about their bodies, because I again have a similar story. I'm in my early 30s and studied as a biologist and then a neuroscientist, and it still was only frighteningly few years ago that I really realized what the full implication of female biology and female hormones are on our health and our well-being. So I'm going to start by hopefully speaking a little bit about that here this evening, or sorry, I'm in the UK. It's this evening for me, but I'm sure it's earlier in the day for many of you. And to really start to highlight why I think it's extremely important, not only that we understand our own biology so that we can, be forewarned about what the symptoms are around menopause and why they come about, but also so we can start to look at what could be good options and why potentially psychedelics could be also good options. So that's why I'm here, because I think it's really important that we do understand what makes female biology unique, and we do understand that in the context of psychedelics. And what really makes female biology unique is, of course, our hormones and our ovarian hormones, primarily things like estrogen and progesterone. Now, these, of course, are very, very active in their fluctuation throughout our reproductive lifespan when we are having a menstrual cycle every month. And we see this sort of delicate orchestra take place where we see, rising of estrogen and declining of estrogen as we see rising of progesterone, and then both decline and we have our menses. Now that goes on throughout our reproductive lifespan, but what then happens is we enter into menopause. Now, I think there's a little bit of confusion when we hear the word menopause and perimenopause as to what we're really referring to and what we're really defining. Now, something that shocked me is that perimenopause is actually up to about 10 years long. And many women don't realize that they're in perimenopause into several years into that, and they start to think, what is happening to me? I don't feel the same as I did before. I'm not sleeping anymore. You're starting to get this symptomology that we're very, very bad in, Western medicine in recognizing and explaining to women that actually it's quite normal for you to not feel normal during this time. Now, the reason that we don't feel very normal during the perimenopausal time is that, during our menstrual cycle, we can track it. We know that, okay, on average, there's going to be a 4-week period where, we're going to start to feel great as the estrogen goes up. We ovulate, we then get more progesterone. That makes us feel more relaxed. And then when our hormones crash, we get things like premenstrual symptoms that we're all quite common with. Now, once we're in perimenopause, that fluctuation in hormones becomes increasingly erratic. And once we're into sort of an early perimenopause, we can get sort of over 7-day shifts in terms of the length of our menstrual cycle. And once we start to move into something like late perimenopause, you have sort of over 60 days between each of our menses during that time. Now, once we enter into what we would classify as postmenopause, that is the point at which you have now gone at least 12 months since your last period. Now, it's at that point we would say that somebody has fully entered menopause. Now, what does that mean? We've gone along with a nice sort of cyclical way of our menstrual cycle. We enter perimenopause where we see this very erratic movement of hormones. And then once we're in menopause, both our estrogen and our progesterone levels drop to a stable but low level. And actually, when women enter that menopause stage, they actually do get a lot more kind of structure back. A lot of the disturbing symptomology reduces. And I think a lot of that is to do with the fact that we're not having that fluctuation anymore. But it also, I really love this expression. The Japanese call it the second spring. It's a real opportunity for women to enter a new era of their lives where perhaps we're no longer burdened by the realities of a menstrual cycle, and we can perhaps focus on other things. But why do we get this symptomology at all when we see this fluctuation in hormones? Well, it's an awful lot to do with what these hormones actually do. So the primary hormone that we talk about in the context of menopause, of female reproduction, is estrogen. And we have several different forms of estrogen. But when we look at estrogen and its activity within the brain, we see that it actually works as a very powerful neurosteroid. And we're never really taught that. We're only really told, estrogen makes our reproductive system go round. It defines whether we are, going to ovulate or not. But to me, that doesn't really make sense that would be the end of its action. We are animals after all. We evolved to be adaptive to our environment. So it only makes sense that these reproductive hormones are having a significant impact within our brains. And they do. And there's a lot of research, particularly in menopausal women, that show when we have our estrogen levels drop during menopause, we see significant changes in things like our memory and our memory performance. And that really goes down onto a structural level. So we really see a neuronal level changes in the way that our brain is able to adapt and make new connections with different neurons. And so once we kind of lose that estrogen, we actually see a reduction in memory function. Now, if you give women things like HRT, you actually see their memory performance go back up. But it's more than just sort of its activity within memory. Another big action of estrogen is that it really interacts with our serotonergic system. Now, the serotonergic system and serotonin, the neurotransmitter serotonin, is a system in our brain that really is very heavily influencing things like our mood. So when we have low levels of estrogen, it's quite likely we've got lower levels of activation in our serotonergic system, and therefore we have lower mood in general. Furthermore, we also know that estrogen gets involved in other systems like our dopaminergic system. That's really our reward neurotransmitter. And we see that estrogen really regulates our dopamine sensitivity. And so when we lose estrogen, we have a real change in our sensitivity to dopamine. Now, beyond that, estrogen really is a wonderful thing for our brains because it doesn't just act on the functioning of our brain and the structure of our brain, but it also really acts as a neuroprotective in the brain. Now, what do I mean by that? Well, we know that estrogen actually works as an anti-inflammatory. So it reduces things like chronic inflammation in the brain. Now, the chronic inflammation in the brain can be associated with the development of things like depression and anxiety. And that obviously can then lead to the development of a number of other mental health disorders. Furthermore, it also helps with things like reducing neuronal cell death, and helping our neuronal tissues to stay plastic and to stay malleable. What does that really mean to us? Well, it means that we have better memory and better cognition, better executive functioning. Now, that's only estrogen that I'm talking about, but there is, of course, another hormone here, which is progesterone, and that also drops off when we hit menopause. Now, progesterone also works as a neurosteroid, and it's very much a mood regulator. It works as like an anti-anxiety-like substance within our bodies. So when we have lower levels of progesterone, we can also see this increase in anxiety that can occur. Now, what does kind of any of that mean? Well, it really means that when we hit menopause, it is a kind of health risk in some regard. And we see that if we look at the women's health data, when we hit menopause, there is a big uptick in mental health disorders in women. So number one in that is things like depression. We see increases in anxiety and mood instability. We see big problems with sleep disturbances and heightened sensitivity to certain stressors. So we have a heightened cortisol response to certain stress. And one of the things that I think we're really starting to understand in the scientific community is that there is a twofold increase of the risk for things like Alzheimer's disease in women. So we really are at a heightened risk for the development of dementias because we lose that neuroprotective effect of estrogen. And furthermore, I know this isn't, a mental health condition, but I think it's one that's extremely important. It's one that I would be very concerned around is, we do see cognitive decline and reduction in women's executive functioning during menopause. So that's a kind of quick overview of, why menopause really is something that we need to be paying more attention to. And it isn't just something that we should suffer in silence for. And the reason that I guess we are kind of here today is to discuss, well, why might psychedelics be any good for that? Now, I described to you some of the action of estrogen and progesterone in our brain. And if we look at what is the action of psychedelics and classic psychedelics, so I'm talking about things like psilocybin that we would find in magic mushrooms, LSD, DMT, ayahuasca, mescaline. There's, a number of various ones and ones that have been chemically synthesized now, but they all have a very, very similar action, and that is that they work within the serotonergic system. So their action increases functioning within our serotonergic system. But when we really dig down on what they do far more than that. They also work as things that are going to be anti-inflammatory within our brain. They help to allow our cells to grow and stay plastic. And they also help us to grow new, during neurogenesis, to grow new parts of the neurons. Now, the reason that is interesting to me, because there's such a synergy between those two forms of action, between estrogen and progesterone and towards psychedelics, that we can start to think about potentially how we could use psychedelics as a sort of way of replacing some of that activity that we would have lost during menopause and during the reduction of our hormones like estrogen and progesterone. And so I really think for women who are going through menopause and are looking for ways that potentially they could regain some of the neuroprotective loss and the neurofunctioning loss from the reduced level of hormones could be things like microdosing with psychedelics. Now, what is microdosing? Well, when we take a psychedelic, often we think about what we would describe as a macro dose. So somebody taking a very large amount of psychedelics in a way that induces a hallucinatory effect, where they are likely for several hours to be in what we would describe as a trip, where they are having a series of internal processes that mean that they are, engaging with various different thought patterns, and you are quite sort of, although you are very active within your own mind, physically, you wouldn't want to be moving around the world around you because it wouldn't be safe. But when we talk about things like microdosing practices, what we're talking about is taking sub-perceptual levels of a psychedelic on a more kind of not daily basis, but perhaps 2 or 3 days a week, or certain times when you want to engage with certain practices, and doing that in a very kind of mindful and intentional way that allows you to still go about your daily life, to still kind of engage with your children, still go to work, still do the housework, still do whatever it is you want to do. But you do have a very small level of this substance having this effect in your body. Now, Could it be then that by doing that, we are in some way, as I say, replacing this estrogen effect? We are gaining this ability to bolster our serotonin, bolster the neuroprotective effects, and potentially be able to sort of improve various different things. Now, that's sort of the hypothesis of the science behind that. And I know obviously I've whizzed through that all rather quickly, but do we have any real evidence to support it? Well, there's a lot of different bits of science that have been done around microdosing so far. But because of the way that the law is often structured, it's very difficult for us to run clinical trials due to the scheduling of these substances, mostly as Schedule 1 substances, which means that the regulators do not recognize them as having therapeutic benefit. But that's something we've really been looking to change. And we are starting to now see a number of clinical trials take place where we're looking at the comparison between a microdose of psychedelics and a placebo to see if there is an improvement. Now, those trials are in their infancy. Some of the initial evidence does seem to suggest that we are seeing positive impact for things like anxiety. But outside of that, we're able to run trials that are not clinical trials, but they are observational. So we're asking people out in the wild, as it were, who are choosing to microdose in their own lives, if they would like to take part in these often completely anonymous research projects where they are able to give their data about how they found different microdoses have affected them. Now, the data from those studies is pretty mixed, and it seems extremely positive when we first look at it. But once we really start to dig down and we start to try and tease out things like an expectation bias, the evidence for it is a little less. And all of those have really been asking people the question, do you feel better? Do you feel less anxious? Do you feel like your memory is working better? But what I really want to understand is, what effect are we really having on the neuronal tissue? You know, if we're talking about things like how could we reduce a woman's chances of developing a something like Alzheimer's, a dementia-like disorder, I really want to see, you know, on a neuronal level, are psychedelics able to do that? Now, we don't actually have any studies that have done that so far. It's something I'm definitely planning out at Hystelica. You know, how could we get that evidence? How could we get there? And until we do have that, we're not really able to give anyone very concrete answers as to whether this works or not. But we are now starting to see many, many women coming forward who have started using these practices, particularly in menopause, who really do have such positive stories. Now, maybe that is because of the effects that I've said, but I think there's also a lot of other really interesting parts there. I think there's something about microdosing and that very intentional practice of doing it that is very beneficial for this time in their lives. And furthermore, we're seeing a lot of really excellent communities that are popping up that people are able to join and really be a part of. And I think that that is something that is extremely useful for women in this stage of their lives. So that's a very, very quick overview of the science of it, of menopause, of psychedelics, and where we are in terms of the science and research. But I will stop talking now and allow Marcella to talk a bit more about her experience.
Amazing. And Marcella, before you do so, I just wanted to give Steph an opportunity to jump in and comment on, there's so many amazing questions that have been put in the chat. We're going to have like a proper Q&A after Marcella speaks, but I did just want to pop over to Steph for 3 minutes or so to give you a chance to comment on some of the things you saw, and maybe also share a little bit of your personal experience. I think that would be really valuable. Oh, are you on mute?
I'm muted. Sorry. Thank you. And thank you, Grace, for that overview. It's important, I think, for us women to try to dive deep and understand our cycles and our biochemistry. And sometimes we just kind of like like move with the current, and we don't really focus on these details, and they can just be extremely supportive information to our experience, and it validates, but it can also help inform the choices we're going to make and the options that we're going to, want to select to be supportive of these transitions. And, for me, the way I've seen psychedelic medicine and microdosing is that it's not really about replacing conventional medicine. It's about innovating where it has fallen short. Because a lot of the treatments that are available to us are limited or inadequate, or have even been designed without our biology in mind. So it's an expansion of the current science and the current medicine. And I think that at its core, this is about choice. And it's giving women the right to try. And it's also about empowering women to ask questions, but then also empowering our physicians and our providers to look outside their toolkit. And for me, microdosing, through my life at different phases, to be supportive of whatever transitions I might be going through, has also taught me to look outside, regular pharmaceuticals. And the way, there were many ways that I got into women's health and wanting to support and advocate and educate. But one of the important pieces for me in my life was when I was getting a lot of PMS out of the blue. And I knew that if I spoke to my physician was going to be like, let's get you on a different birth control. Let's change your birth control. And this isn't exactly HRT, but I equate it with the same concept, because here I'm taking something exogenous to manage what's going on inside my body. And I didn't want to do that. So I found a functional medicine specialist who recommended traditional Chinese medicine supplement, and it's an herbal supplement. And I did roll my eyes at it at first, but it really was supportive, and it really did change things for me. And so where I'm getting at with this is that microdosing a plant like psilocybin, for example, has also just opened my eyes further to the world of plants. And I'm seeing a lot of questions in the chat about, well, what else can we try? What else can we stack? And I think that doing your own research is really important, because plants are powerful. Just because they're natural doesn't mean that they can't interact with other medicines or supplements that you might be taking, or just with your biochemistry. But to just answer some of these questions, there are natural supplements that you can educate yourself about, or ask herbalists, or ask your physicians about. Black cohosh is a great one. Red clover, rhodiola, ashwagandha, shatavari, chasteberry. So I want to empower people to think about microdosing as not just limited to psilocybin. There are other plants that you can involve in that protocol in a supplement stack. But if you do opt for microdosing, something that I learned and that I always advise people to do is to develop a relationship with this plant or substance. Some people also have found success microdosing a psychedelic called LSD, if some of you have heard of LSD. And there's amazing research happening in New Zealand around LSD microdosing for women's health. So it is very promising. But regardless of the substance that you choose, you're going to have to learn how to use it, because as everyone has mentioned so far, it is unregulated. There needs to be more research. There isn't a prescription or, like a owner's manual that will tell you this way will work for you. There are many ways. So it's develop a relationship. It's find your threshold is what I always say. So start very small before you go and consume a large dose. Find your threshold, see how you feel. Grace mentioned a microdose can be subperceptual. It could also be subhallucinogenic. It means that you're able to function. And if you're taking a microdose, a few days a week, and you feel like you can't do work on your computer, or you can't drive, or you're too, in the clouds to take care of your kids or fulfill other responsibilities, then maybe you should lower your dose. And so it can take a minute to understand how your body is going to react to it. And then develop a protocol of some days on, some days off. Always consult a physician or a medical professional, especially if you're taking other prescriptions. and just enjoy the exploration, and know that, you know, if microdosing psilocybin or LSD or a psychedelic isn't for you, and you want to wait till it's regulated, or you want to wait till there's more research, that's okay too. Like, we're here to really share that this is a new frontier, and there are other options, there are other plants. So yeah, I think that's kind of what I wanted to share. And with that, I will pass it on to Marcella.
And just a reminder, Grace and Steph, will you mute yourselves while we're off, so we don't get any background noise? Thank you so much.
You want me to jump in? Am I good?
Yes, you have the floor. So exciting.
I'm going to tell my story. So I'm 44. When I was 39, I had everything I ever wanted. My family, my business, everything was going great. But I was waking up feeling unmotivated, super depressed, and I didn't feel like me. And I went on this self-exploration. I started meditating. I started reading spiritual guru books and sitting with myself. And it just felt like I didn't want to wake up in the morning. Yet I was speaking publicly about joy and entrepreneurship. And then I was finding myself in bed, not wanting to wake up. My body hurt. I had no libido. I didn't want anybody to touch me. Even my kids trying to snuggle up with me. My skin felt creepy crawly. I thought I didn't love my husband anymore because I just couldn't even handle how he was breathing. I was going out of my mind. I went to my gynecologist. I asked her to check my hormones. She did, and came back and said everything's normal. So of course I just thought, well, I must need to read better books, more podcasts, lose some weight, go to yoga, motivate myself a little bit more, because this just must be me. And that is when I was introduced to mushrooms. And my very first experience with mushrooms was a deep dive. And my intention in that was to understand the magnitude of women. And in this experience, I came to this point where kind of a dream state, and I'm feeling the magnitude of women. And I'm understanding that as I understand this, I'm also going to be faced with the devastation that many of us are not that, and maybe never will be. And here we are, I'm seeing it. We are all expansive. We are full creations. We are endless in everything. And we can do all the things. And at the same time, I am pissed. I'm like, if I am all those things, and I have this all of creation, then why the hell am I in this body that hurts, doesn't want to get out of bed, has to get dressed? I didn't want to be bothered to blink. That's how frustrating it was to realize women have been reduced to our bodies in society, and to be aware that women are a full universe and then smashed into these bodies that really are painful and confusing was infuriating. Well, the next day, I am driving in the car and the wind hits my face, and my soul had been unlocked at that point. And I remember my soul saying, "Wind, isn't that neat?" And it really took my breath away. I'd never heard my soul speak that clearly, that loud. And she just said, "We didn't know wind if we weren't in this body." And then my daughter hugged me later that day, and my soul again said, "Hugs, aren't those neat?" And we didn't know hugs. And then later I would be frustrated about something. And in the middle of being frustration, in the middle of it all, my soul would say, "Ooh, frustration, isn't that neat?" And I was like, you gotta be kidding me. And it just kept going. These little tiny awarenesses, even from being cold and uncomfortable in my body, my soul would say, "Ooh, cold, isn't that neat?" And then being doubtful, being fearful, being excited, every single feeling and thought, my soul would say, "Isn't that neat?" And you have to know that I grew up Mormon, and this idea that my soul was here to experience feelings, not to achieve this big award at the end of life, changed my entire existence. what it also did is it dropped me into my body. And I became aware of who I was and how disconnected I was from my body. I started paying attention to all of these symptoms. My body ached. I didn't like people. I didn't feel like myself. I couldn't remember anything. I was Googling early onset dementia because my symptoms were so bad. And then I was introduced to hormone therapy. And I feel like what had happened is I had woken up my soul with psychedelics, but it wasn't matching my body. And I got on hormone therapy. It woke up my body. Suddenly, I'm not tired anymore. I like people. Nothing hurts. And it matched all of a sudden. And what happened then was I shared that story on social media and it went to 9 million views. And what broke my world after that was that 9 million women begged me and said, I feel dead inside. I didn't know I lived in a world where women felt dead inside after 40. The interesting thing about this conversation is that right now, testosterone is also a Schedule I drug. It is also not FDA approved for women. And testosterone is the thing that woke up my body. So the fact that we're talking about psychedelics that is not authorized and not legal, and testosterone, which technically is not approved for women, and that is the two things that are waking up our brain, waking up our body. No matter what, women have to go underground to get the help that we need. That's where we're at. And that's what happened when I shared my story. Women are like, where are we going? I don't even care. Just give it to me. We cannot afford to live in a world where women feel dead inside any longer. It is killing everybody. It is stealing the relationships that we have. It's destroying men and women. And I hope to continue to be an advocate for women to wake up and feel awake and alive and want to wake up in the morning. And I'm thrilled to be here. I hope women take the deep dive and take the risk, because what we need is not being offered to us. It is all an underground effort, no matter what.
Thank you for sharing your story. It's very inspiring. And I know that there are so many women, as you shared, who echo these feelings. And, you know, for me, I'm also in my 30s, and I think about, I hear these stories and I'm just like, oh my God, is that going to be me? Right. And I think a lot of women my age think like, is that going to be me? Are we going to go through this? And, you know, chances are we're going to feel a lot of this, but what's going to make the difference is that we're going to go into that transition, having had these conversations with more educational tools, with more support. And that is the empowerment and the agency that I was talking about. Because if we're blindsided, then we're just going to perpetuate this cycle. And to Grace's point, you know, I don't know if you guys know this, but I think it was only in like the 90s that women were included in clinical research trials. And of course, we've changed that, but still today, clinical research trials are predominantly white, middle-aged or young men. And not only that, but clearly there is a relationship between our biochemistry, our hormones, and some of these psychedelics. And so if we're going to be researching them, not only do we have to include women, but we have to take into consideration our hormones, our cycles, where we are at in our lives, in the menstrual cycle, because the response to these medicines is going to change. And furthermore, what about more diversity in our clinical trials? Marginalized communities and populations have higher risk for all kinds of illnesses, and they are often excluded and not included in clinical trials. And so again, we don't know if psychedelic therapies are going to be safe and effective for the LGBTQ community. So we need more conversations like these. We need people like Marcella that are not afraid to step out into the public and tell their story, because it is our human experience. And it's by uniting our voices in all these different channels that we are going to move the needle.
I just want to make a point. It's so interesting because you're saying you get to walk into this with awareness. I always bring perimenopause and menopause back to puberty. Can you imagine if there's a 10-year-old that didn't hang out with other 10-year-olds, didn't go to school every day, didn't hung out with like way older people that are beyond the puberty phase, and then she starts growing hair and smelling weird and boobs and period, she would think she was dying. She would feel out of her freaking mind. Her emotions are all over the place. She doesn't want to go by the rules. She's yelling at everybody. But if you are prepared, if you know, okay, you're going to need deodorant, you're going to start growing hair, you're going to have a period, here's pads, then it's less scary. And what is happening right now is you got all these 40-year-olds who are not hanging out with other 40-year-olds. Our friends are like 30 and 50. So we're not having this concentrated view that you feeling crazy and not liking people, it doesn't feel normal because we're not hanging out with everyone that's in this concentrated space. And this perimenopause, it is a second puberty. 100% of women will go through their ovaries dying. 100%. And 40% of your life will be spent in menopause. Mm-hmm. And yet there is no care. There is nothing being offered. And so, Stephanie, sorry to say, but like, yes, you will. You will go through this.
Yeah, I know.
But now you know, right? Like your body odor is going to change. Now it's not so scary. Now when it does change, you're not going to be like, what is wrong with me? Right?
Or the mental preparation, just the mental preparation, I think makes a difference. Like we're going to hit that time in our lives, but not being blindsided is huge in my opinion.
Yeah.
Grace, I think you wanted to say something.
Yeah, just to talk to that point about how ignored women are in this phase. In 1993, that you had to include women in clinical trials, and that's not even at all levels, and it certainly does not happen. And we do not see sex as a biological variable being properly accounted for in all clinical trials. But the majority of females who are in clinical trials, are required to be on some kind of hormonal contraception, which of course blunts our natural hormonal cycling. So we don't fully understand what most drugs that have been licensed look like in naturally cycling women. But women of menopausal age are often excluded. We normally put an upper age limit on clinical trials that excludes women who will have gone through perimenopause and menopause. So we just don't have data on most drugs that exist and how they interact with women. And if you look at drugs that have been removed from the market, it's much more likely because it's an adverse effect that was noted in women rather than in men. But when we do look at trials that have tried to look at menopause, like you say, unless, unfortunately, you are deceased before the point of going through menopause, you will go through it. How many, and how much symptomology do we know is around it? How much does it have an impact on our health and our lives and, God forbid, the economy? But it does. And if we look at the trials that take place, there is only one symptom that they really ever look at, which is hot flashes. And I don't understand it, because if you ask most women going through menopause, what is it that is most affecting you? It's not that. It's the cognitive stuff. It's the depression. It's the anxiety. Those are the things that women are really concerned about. And we do not see any clinical trials or any products. And luckily we are hopefully coming to a new dawn. I know we've had a little bit of a blip in the last 6 months about caring about women's health, but we are at a new dawn of taking this more seriously. I think because we've got people like Marcella putting their hand up and saying this is just not on. But we do need to have clinical trials that really do get to the bottom of understanding how we can affect these other symptoms that are really disrupting women's lives.
Thanks, Grace. I think we're going to move to some questions. I'm going to read some out loud, and I think we can maybe go round robin and try to address as many as we can. You can keep dropping your questions in the chat. We'll try our best to get to them. If we don't, I think Chelsea has shared our information. You can always contact us, and again, we'll do our best. There's one right here that I see. what is the reason some women experience almost debilitating symptoms in perimenopause and menopause, and others seem to barely feel anything? I could take that one simply. It's a great question and really insightful to point that out. The truth is, every woman experiencing perimenopause and menopause is going to be a little bit different because it's a mix of biology and brain chemistry and life history too. But some women have heightened sensitivity to hormonal fluctuations, especially estrogen, which affects mood, sleep, memory, even body temperature. And I think also very plainly, others have more resilient systems or smoother adrenal function, and that can really buffer the transition. Your genetics, your gut health, if you have chronic stress, if you have trauma history, that can all play a role. So it's not just hormones. And I want us to all stop thinking about menopause and a lot of these other transitions about these singular medicalized hormonal events, because they are affecting the entire system of our bodies. And that is going to include our environment and like the experience of our life as well. I don't know if anybody wants to add to that. Okay, is that good?
I mean, I will tiny bit. I mean, in general, I think women have been, people, not just women, but everyone has been treated like they're this box. So every time we've gone to the doctor, we fit into this one dose, this one box. I don't think we have any concept of how individual our body actually is. And one thing that microdosing mushrooms has done for me is help me get in touch with my own individual body and listening to my own intuition about my body. And the variance of women and their health and how they feel is so massive. You literally are your own ecosystem that needs your own stuff. And the only way you're going to be able to help yourself the best is if you actually start listening to your own body. And that's something that microdosing has immensely helped me personally with, but I have watched it help so many women just touch back into themselves instead of listening to like everything out here.
Absolutely. And it's neurological, it's psycho-emotional, and it's existential as well. So like when we're talking about microdosing, when we're talking about psychedelics, we don't want to just think of this as like another pharmacological intervention treating a symptom. We're trying to think about the whole person here, right? And so the way, we're trying to practice with psychedelics is with therapy, right? It is with intention. It's not just taking another pill. So that would also help address that existential piece, that psycho-emotional piece of this transition. I'm going to move to another question. This one says, is microdosing psilocybin meant to go hand in hand with HRT? This person said, I'm doing both and it's been life-changing. Grace, do you have any opinions on that?
Yeah, I mean, I think that microdosing very much can be used alongside HRT. I mean, again, I cannot say anything for certain because we don't have any data because that's not been properly researched. But we don't seem to see that there's any significant interaction between women that are doing that. Just another point on that, one of the things that might be extremely useful to think about when we think about the uses of microdoses of psychedelics in women is particularly when we're thinking about women perhaps who have gone through perimenopause, who are in perimenopause or menopausal, who aren't able to use HRT, for instance, because they have a sensitivity to estrogen because of a cancer risk, for instance. So it could be that we're able to use it instead of HRT in women where HRT would not be appropriate. But I definitely have heard of many cases where people are using it alongside. But as we've kind of said, it is a little bit of a trial and error. And, when we talk about the difference in symptomology between different women in menopause, it's very much the same in terms of our one thing that we're starting to understand about psychedelics is that it doesn't seem to be very relational to things like body weight, how much we respond. It very much is an individual level. And it could be that when we start taking things like HRT, the amount of a microdose that we were taking before might need to change as well, because we're adding other things into the system that are working on similar systems in the brain. And therefore, when we're adding or taking anything away from our regime, you need to ensure, you need to kind of check in with yourself to see if you need to, maybe increase or decrease doses of your microdose, for instance.
Just so you know, the global community that I have, it's free. It's on Facebook. You can find it by going to Wake Her Up on Facebook groups. But a large, like thousands of the women in there are on HRT and microdosing. So if you want to come hear more stories like mine, I'm just kind of a representative of my community. You can go and ask a lot of these like in-depth questions, one about like HRT and your specific question about your body. You can go and ask that in there. And then you can also have the conversation about how it's interacting with HRT. It's just a great resource and totally free.
Thank you.
Amazing. Steph, I'm just going to give a few quick Microdosing Collective updates and then you can close us out. Does that sound good?
Sure.
Thank you guys so much. I learned so much from this, and I'm really excited that we put this group together, and hopefully we'll do way more of these. Everyone definitely check out Marcella's link here. And the few things that I want to note about Microdosing Collective. So some of you might have come into this webinar not having any idea what Microdosing Collective is. So just quick overview is that we're the first 501c nonprofit to exist that is focused on microdosing, legalization, and education. So myself, staff, along with a bunch of other incredible people have gathered this community of people that are all very passionate about using sub-hallucinogenic psychedelics for supplementation and what that actually looks like to roll out on a policy perspective. Because if you've been following along the psychedelic space, most the conversation is focused on macrodosing at service centers, and there's this entire population of people, a statistic that we got over the last few months that I think is really representative of how much this needs to be focused on, is that in 2023, 8 million people in the United States took a psychedelic, and 50% of those people, 4 million, were microdosing. So this is a huge movement. It's all underground. We want to help bring these amazing products above ground, help make them legal, safe, and increase, education around them as well. So what we're doing as a nonprofit is really cool. Chelsea, if you can put our website link in the chat, that would be amazing. We just launched a microdosing guide, a really comprehensive, we're biased, but we think the best microdosing guide to exist, whether you're a starter or more advanced user. So definitely check out our guide, join our newsletter. If you've joined this webinar, you're going to be automatically added to our newsletter. It's great. You will love it. And then we do a ton of great community events. We've done a lot of parties around psychedelic conferences, and we're doing another big one at Psychedelic Science this year in Denver. So if you're in this chat and you're looking to plug into a community of people that are really passionate about this, it's great when we all come together on Zoom, but it's more powerful to make in real life friends that are passionate about the same thing as you. So, and are on their psychedelic journey in some way. So Psychedelic Science, we're hosting a party with Microdosing Collective. It's June 19th, the Thursday of Psychedelic Science. So that's it. Chelsea, did I miss anything that you wanted me to share about? Steph, I'd love you to share about our headache study as well. Just flagging that before we close us out.
Sure. We have a live headache research survey, which means that we are not requiring you to take any psychedelics, although maybe some of you would love that. But this is a research survey that is looking at the chronic headache population who have used psilocybin or LSD for their chronic headaches. We would love to hear from you if you fit this category. It is on our webpage. Chelsea will drop it in the chat. It takes about 20 minutes to complete. You are contributing to science and the development of new treatments for chronic headaches, which is really important. And we'd love for you to participate. We know you guys have so many questions and they're all amazing, and we can only pack so much into the hour. So I really encourage you to reach out. You can reach out to the Microdosing Collective and we can field your questions to the appropriate person. You could reach out to Marcella, join her community. To Grace as well. Check out her page. They're doing incredible research that you might even be able to participate in. Feel free to reach out to me. I've dropped my website in the chat as well. There's a contact page. I'm happy to get you connected to people that that could help you, and I'm happy to answer as many questions as I can. And if there's nothing else, I want to thank everyone for joining. We have over 100 people in this chat. Clearly, this is an important topic, and I commend everyone here for being part of the conversation. So thank you.
I just want to add one thing. I think one thing that's really frustrating is when we're talking about these really beautiful things like hormones or microdosing, the bottom line is like, where do we go, right? Like, there's nowhere to go. If you come to my community, we will tell you many places you can go for hormones and microdosing.
Yeah, I'm happy to make connections as well. So again, feel free to reach out to us. Is a big message here because we have resources and information, and we're open and happy to help. Thank you.
Awesome.
Amazing.
Thanks, guys.
Thank you guys so much.
Great. Thanks, everybody.
I appreciate all of you. Much love, everyone. I don't know how we end this thing. It was really powerful. It was like a really good drop, and now we're just awkwardly. It's like when you say bye to someone, you're still walking in the same direction. You know?
I see people
How do we get out of here?
Is there a way to go off air?